If you've recently bought a full-frame Sony mirrorless camera, like maybe the Sony A7 III for example, or even if you've had one for a while, and you've also found that, like me, you really like long telephoto lenses to capture things that are just farther away from you and you can't get any closer, like when shooting long-distance street photography or wildlife or even some insect photography, but you just don't want to spend $1,000 or a lot more on a long zoom lens, then I have a budget but still great quality solution for you. And that is to buy an older Sony A-Mount 70-300 lens and get the Sony LA-EA3 adapter to mount this older lens to your newer camera. And to preface this video a bit more, this combination and my general use of this lens is primarily for photography, not so much for video, because I just don't use this long of a lens for much video work, although it does work in video with some caveats. And I realize this is a bit of a hard sell in 2021, given that there are some pretty great new zoom lenses for under $1,000 right now, but my purchase saved me over $600 at the time, so it was worth it. And you can pick up this combination for around $500 now, depending on your timing and the used inventory market. Now, why would you want to buy an A-mount lens in 2021 when there are so many Sony and third-party telephoto zooms for, quite honestly, pretty great prices? Well, my main 3 reasons for buying an older A-mount lens are cost. Let's be honest, this lens and adapter combination only cost me $600 2 years ago. That was $489 for the lens, used from B&H Photo, and $109 for the LA-EA3 adapter, also used from B&H Photo. So just under $600 total for both, for a 70-300 millimeter zoom lens. And both were in pretty mint condition when I got them. The newer E-mount version of this lens was about $1,300 at the time, so I saved over half the cost of the E-mount version. The second reason is that the A-mount lenses have a true linear focus with viewable distance markings, which means that focus is repeatable and the lens will hold that focus when you turn the camera off and back on again. So if your subject is at 10 feet, you can set it there, verify focus, and the focus will stay there, even when you turn the camera off. With most newer E-mount lenses, if you're manually focusing and you turn the camera off and back on, you may have to refocus, especially if you take out the battery or take out the dummy battery if it's on AC power. The third reason is the dreaded focus inertia on most mirrorless lenses, which is when the lens focuses faster or slower depending on how fast you turn the focus ring, like this Tamron 28-75. I can't stand that. You can't accurately pull focus on these focus-by-wire lenses because you may turn the lens a little bit faster or slower this time or that, and the lens will try to judge how fast or slow you want to focus. And it's just really hard to manually focus quickly with focus-by-wire lenses. Even the newer Tamron 70-300, that lens doesn't offer linear focus, so it's going to suffer from the same focus inertia and dependent on how fast or slow you turn the focus ring. Just make mirrorless lenses with linear focus, please? But with this A-mount lens, it does have linear focus, so it doesn't focus faster or slower if you turn the ring faster or slower. It just focuses based on exactly where the focus ring is, and it's the same every time. To be honest, cost was enough for me to go this route with a used lens and adapter. I just couldn't justify $1,300 at the time. Now, specifically, this is the Sony A7iii SSM lens that was designed for Sony's older A-mount DSLR cameras, and it has a variable aperture of 4.5 to 5.6. And honestly, I've never seen those older A-mount cameras, and as of a few weeks ago, mid-April 2021, I think, they announced that they're discontinuing those camera models. But the glass and the operation of the A-mount lenses are still great. But, of course, to attach this Sony A-mount lens to a newer Sony mirrorless E-mount camera, you're going to have an adapter. And the Sony LA-EA3 is one of the adapters that will work with this lens. There are several LA-EA adapter models, but I got the LA-EA3 because it obviously adapts an A-mount lens to an E-mount camera. It's for full-frame lenses and cameras. The EA1 and EA2 are for APS-C cameras. And of course, you can use the LA-EA3 with other Sony A-mount lenses. There are 2 other models, the LA-EA4 and LA-EA5, neither of which I have, and the LA-EA5 is relatively new and wasn't available when I got this combination. Also, the LA-EA3 won't focus lenses that don't have an internal focus motor. This one does, so it's fine. But there are some older lenses that don't have an internal focus motor and rely on the older cameras to turn a screw to focus. This adapter doesn't have that screw, so it wouldn't work with those lenses. So just stick with the SSM models and you should be just fine. This is my only telephoto lens that I have for my A7 III, and it's really been pretty great, even having to adapt it. Now, as I said, Sony does make a native E-mount version of this lens, but it's still $1,200 new. And when I got this older lens, I just couldn't justify spending $1,200 to $1,300 on the E-mount version because, well, I had just bought the camera and my main lens, the Tamron 28-75. And the camera and my first lens were expensive enough, as you might imagine, so I was looking for something to get me more reach in my photos without spending a lot more money. And really, this combination has been great for photography. I really had no issues with it. And again, the SSM models are the higher-end Sony A-mount lenses, so personally, I'd stick with the SSM models over the SAM. The SSM lenses have better build quality, quieter autofocus motors, and they're faster than the SAM models. And the SAM models also have a more plasticky build and were just a less expensive, lower quality option within the A-mount series. The adapter, the Sony LA-EA3, allows full communication between the lens and the camera, so autofocus works beautifully, and generally pretty fast for photos. Face and eye detection even work. And again, I should note that I really only use this lens for photography. I just don't have a lot of need to shoot video with such a long lens. You can shoot video with this lens, and once you grab focus, it will stay there, or you can manually focus, but it won't continuously autofocus in video mode. And even Sony's website states that the LA-EA3 adapter, when your camera is in video mode, will only autofocus when the shutter is pressed halfway. I think the LA-EA4 and 5 may allow continuous autofocus in video, but I don't have those adapters, nor do I have any other lenses, so don't quote me on that. But there is a link in the description that compares all of the models. Overall, I've been really happy with this lens and the adapter on my Sony A7 III. And if you're wondering if it's any good being an adapted lens, here's some photos that I've taken with it. Overall, I'm really happy with this combo. I think the image quality out of this older A-mount lens is really pretty great, but of course there are some cons. This particular lens has a minimum focus distance of about 3 feet. The spec sheet actually says about 3.9 feet, but I measured about 3 feet from the front of the lens. So macro shots aren't going to work, but that's typical of lenses in the zoom range. And when I said insect photography in the intro, yes, I've gotten some pretty decent photos of insects with this lens, as you saw in the example photos, but it still required heavy cropping in post because I couldn't be closer than about 3 feet or 1 meter to the subject. Again, continuous autofocus for video doesn't work, so keep that in mind. But again, I don't really use this lens for video, and this really isn't a video-centric lens because it's such a long zoom, and it's a variable aperture lens, which means it stops down as you zoom in. Autofocus does work, and it works quite well, and with the A7 III's eye autofocus, that functionality does work through the lens and the adapter, so it can find and track the subject's eye. But when in AFC mode, if you're trying to do burst photos and having the subject walk towards you, that's a little more difficult. It will track your subject as they move closer or further away from the camera, but when you start firing off shots, it then has to kind of reacquire focus in between shots. But as long as you're just half pressing the shutter just to acquire focus, it will hold that focus. If the subject does move back and forth, then you can fire off a shot when they're in the position you need them in. But it's just not fast enough to continually track subjects coming towards or walking away from you when you're taking burst photos. Newer lenses or one of the other adapters may allow that or be better at it, but for my general use, this adapter and lens is fine. And even with slightly moving subjects, the lens grabs focus very quickly. It does add a little bit of length to the overall setup, but not much, about an extra 1¼ inches. And since this is my only A-mount lens, the adapter pretty much lives on this lens the entire time, so I just consider this whole thing my zoom lens. And of course it adds a little bit of extra weight, but not much. The adapter's pretty light. But on the plus side, it gives you an extra mounting point on the adapter to counteract the weight and length difference if you need to put it on a tripod. So for my general photography needs, the overall use of this lens, the autofocus, the speed, and the repeatable and linear focus have been just fine, and actually pretty fast. And I've taken a lot of great photos with this combination on my A7 III. And I saved over $600 in the process. And yes, there are some great new lenses out there for really great prices, but cameras and lenses are still pretty expensive, especially when you're not a full-time photographer. And we're all trying to save a little money, and there's nothing wrong with that. And again, depending on the current pricing and used inventory, you can probably pick up this combination for around $400 to $500. And that's still less than some new lenses. And even though the true DSLR cameras like those older Sony A-mounts may be close to being dead and mirrorless may be the future, glass is glass. And if it's good glass, it will last. That rhymed. So that's it. A decent, more budget-friendly way to get a 300mm zoom lens for your Sony mirrorless camera. I hope some of this information was helpful. Happy shooting, good luck, and have fun.